and welcome to this very first panel discussion at this year's IRTC conference. Can you please take your seats? I'm very happy that we already have so many people here. The official opening of the scientific part of the conference will be tomorrow morning, but today we had this warm-up day with the workshops and the site visits, and I hope you already enjoyed them. And now we directly jump in with the first panel discussion. It's about industry, policy and society views on resource policies. Can we find common ground on this, despite the differences that naturally come with this views? And I'm very happy about the panel I can welcome today. First, Marko Maver from the Slovenian Ministry for Natural Resources and Spatial Planning. We have Mrs. Amrita Dasgupta from the International Energy Agency, Cecilia Mattea from IRMA, the Responsible Mining Standard, Mrs. Yblin Roman from the SIRGE Coalition, Andrés Ángel from POLEN TJ, and Mrs. Susanne Moser from RHI Magnesita. I'm sorry. Usually also Vincent Gouley from Imerys would be here with us, but unfortunately he had a medical emergency. But Cecilia works with him, so she will be able to deliver a few key messages from his perspective. We will open with a round of questions to everyone, and afterwards we will enter in the more spontaneous part where we will discuss about the questions of the common ground on resource policies. And I would like to start here on the left with Mr. Maver, and I think we're all interested in the resource policy Slovenia has, and also about how you prepare for the Critical Raw Materials Act, for example, and for other upcoming policies.
Sure. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also on behalf of myself and Ministry of Natural Resources and Spatial Planning. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Spatial Planning has been, I don't want to say in existence, for the good part of the year or so. We had some restructuring of the ministries last year. Formerly the mining sector, which deals with critical resources, was under the Ministry of Infrastructure. Now it's under our remit, and I've been working on various different policies over the past year or so. I think on a more broader scale, as far as critical resources is concerned, we have integrated the principle of circular economy into our national industry strategy for the period 2021 and 2030, which emphasizes certain aspects such as circularity, sustainability, and so forth. But we also have the Mining Act itself, the National Mining Strategy, which address some aspects for that. Now with the upcoming regulations, in particular the Critical Raw Materials Act, also in light of the natural ENZIA, that's also important in relation to that. We are working quite extensively with the Geological Survey, who is doing, and I must say we are very pleased with the cooperation and so forth. We also increased some funding for the upcoming years to try to ensure that everything that the regulation requires will be addressed in the upcoming months or so. In particular, we are working with Geological Survey on the preparation of the National Research Program, but also try to work as much as possible with the Chamber of Commerce and industrial actors to address all these different aspects. That's kind of in brief, but...
Interesting. And so you have worked with these. You have been working with these policies for quite a long time. So what do you see as the key challenges in policy implementation on a national level?
Well, I think I want to say challenges. Probably to go beyond just the requirements. We obviously we know what the regulation requires of us. I should also note that the CRMA is under the remit of Ministry of Economic Development. However, much of the substantive work is under our remit, Ministry of Natural Resources, so perhaps this interministerial cooperation could be a challenge. It hasn't come up yet, so I'm fairly optimistic that we don't foresee any challenges towards meeting the requirements, but how it will be implemented also depends on cooperation with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, Energy and Climate, because the subject touches all different aspects. So it's finding balance, managing the expectations of the industry, the environmental NGOs, and so forth. And we can get into debates about permitting and other issues, which, later on.
Thank you. Amrita, the IEA, you do demand projections, you do different scenarios, but you're also deeply involved in policy tracking, policy analysis. What are the trends you see currently in CRM policies?
So thanks for the question. The IEA has now, it's been about 5.5 years that we started working on the topic of critical minerals, and we've really expanded our work. So we started with analytical and technical work to assess the demand for critical minerals, but we've expanded that since then to work also on supply projections, on modeling recycling, and in these years also the IEA's governing board included critical minerals or critical raw materials as a part of the official working mandate of the International Energy Agency, which was quite a big thing, because so far the mandate was mostly about energy security and related to traditional fuels and renewable technologies, but the inclusion of critical minerals was a big step. So we are regularly monitoring policy developments at the national level, and we have something called the Critical Minerals Policy Tracker, which you can find easily on our website, and you can go more in depth into the policies. But if I had to summarize really the key trends that we see, I think I could split it into some categories based on whether the country is a producer or a consumer of these minerals, and whether it's an advanced economy or an emerging and developing economy. So I think going into each of the categories, I think so for producer economies that are advanced economies as well, we've seen more of policies related to ESG. And then for incentives to promote more domestic processing and manufacturing. And finally, also local content regulations. Then the next category would be producers that are emerging and developing economies. So here we've seen an increasing proliferation of export regulations and controls, as well as a ramp up in value addition policies, and also some local content regulation policies. And then the final category would be that of advanced economies, which are mostly consumers. And here also ESG related policies play a big role, but recycling specifically, because these are regions which are large consumers but have quite low natural resource endowment. So recycling is really important here. And then finally also a strategic partnership focus for these countries, because it's quite important for them to ensure the reliable supply of these minerals. And one category that was missing from there is emerging economies that are mainly consumers. And here we don't see so much of a trend, but still there is recycling is a focus, and local content regulations are emerging as well. And maybe here a quick example would be the latest policy from India, which is the National Critical Minerals Mission, which really aims to cover every segment of the value chain, starting from exploration to mining to beneficiation and processing, and then finally recycling as well. And I think about $4 billion have been allocated to this cause. Yeah.
Thanks so much for this overview. So these are the national policies. You're also monitoring international policies. Do you see a role for them for balancing one of the main issues we're discussing here, looking at an emerging demand for more critical raw materials and how we can supply them?
Yeah, short answer is absolutely. Most of our work is policy-driven. One of the key responsibilities of the IEA is to really look at how national and international policy are affecting the future of the energy markets, as well as climate and everything that's related to that, which also includes critical raw materials. So all of our projections are based on scenarios. They're not forecasts. They're based on scenarios that reflect policy ambitions. So we have different scenarios based on whether we continue on a trajectory of today's policies or we go more ambitious, trying to have more climate-driven scenarios. So while that's the case, of course, we see that in the more climate-driven scenarios, we have a larger share of renewables, a larger share of batteries. So of course, we need more minerals. And for that, of course, the geographical concentration of the production of these minerals is a key factor to consider. And this is something that since the beginning of this work, the IEA has been flagging that critical raw materials are perhaps more geographically concentrated than traditional fossil fuel resources. And in order to ensure reliable and sustainable supply chains for these minerals, we need to have more diversification. And to this end, very recently, we performed something called the N-1 analysis, which is traditionally done for natural gas markets. But we did that for critical minerals to see what happens if you remove the largest supplier as well as the largest consumer. And in that case, we see that for several minerals, the N-1 supply falls quite significantly below the N-1 demand. And that means in case of supply disruptions, we really need to have more policies that help the diversification of supply.
Thank you very much. Cecilia, you're working on standards at IRMA. How can these standards influence practices or maybe set standards for best practices in industry?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to tell a story because I like to always put the big picture out there. IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, the product of IRMA is a standard that defines what best practice mining should look like. This standard was designed or came about because an NGO, an environmental NGO, protested against the opening of a gold mine in the US. This gold was going to be bought by Tiffany. And Tiffany invited the NGO and said, well, okay, I didn't realize, I'm sorry. Where can I buy responsible gold? And the NGO said it doesn't exist. That's the beginning of IRMA, of how it was set up, basically, that these two parties, the NGO and the buyer, started to work on a definition of best practice mining. However, surprise, surprise, they realized that they couldn't come up with that definition without the mining industry at the table, without the communities at the table, and without labor workers at the table. So when we talk about best practice mining, we need to remember, who's it for? Is it just for the mining industry, or is it also for those that use the materials, that are impacted by those materials, the workers that work on extracting those materials? I like to say the story of IRMA because it presents basically what a credible and robust standard should look like. And I was asked by Alessa, in the absence of colleagues at Imerys, to also give a little bit perhaps their perspective. Imerys is a quarrying company. And I'm not here speaking on their behalf because I don't have that mandate, but they're a company that has entered the lithium business because they found lithium as part of their quarrying activities. Quarrying and lithium mining are very different businesses. So Imerys looked around at the market and said, how can I become a credible partner in this lithium mining business? And that's when they turned to IRMA, basically, because the buyers were requesting it, the automotive sector, the technology sector, but also it had somewhat credibility also with NGOs, communities, and labor. And I say somewhat because we can't make everybody happy. I think that's the reality also of this industry. But one thing that I want to highlight is IRMA is a voluntary system, is a voluntary tool, and ultimately the bottom line is strong regulation, as Marko said, right? And strong implementation of that regulation. We're a tool to provide some level of transparency via the audit process, and it's not me, Cecilia, that does the audit. I'm not a geologist. It's trained independent auditors from the system. And then the accessibility of this information. How can regulators have transparent information, but also investors, communities, and so on?
Could you name some examples where the standard has made a difference in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll name two. The first one is a platinum group metals mine in Zimbabwe. It's a mine that's owned by and operated by Anglo-American. And Anglo underwent an audit against the IRMA system in 2019. Now they're undergoing the verification. No, they are undergoing the second audit, right? Because this is it's not one point in time, but it's actually how can we ensure continuous process improvement. So ZELA, which is the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, it's, as the name suggests, an environmental NGO in Zimbabwe. They released a paper, anybody can see it online, looking at what's changed at that mine for the people that are impacted by the mine. And I'm going to mention three things, but the first one is the trust building. Trust building between the community and the mine. Active quarterly engagement. Now, it sounds normal maybe that a mine should have engagement with the community, but trust me, it's not. Not a lot of mines have that. So now they have a framework in place that allows them to have that. Gaps and improvements. The audit reports, because they are transparent, because anybody can see them, please go on our website, you will see where the company is falling short and what they need to do, or the things that they need to address over the time period. ZELA used that to engage with the government to say, this is what's happening on the ground, so we should also consider reviewing the law, the mining law in Zimbabwe, but also as an engagement tool with the company. What is the progress status? How are you doing this? Why don't you also engage with the community on this specific item? And then the second example that I'm going to give is the Imerys one. Again, not here to represent them, but I think it's a nice story to say. The French law requires engagement in the mining process before the mine is open. So that's a process that Imerys has undergone. But one thing that they highlight as a company is that as they prepare for to meet the IRMA requirements, is that it's helped them to innovate on community engagement over the life cycle of the mine as they plan for that mine. I don't know how many years it will be open, but that's something that's allowed them to think a bit more of what's the minimum bar set by the regulation in this case. However, it's not a perfect picture. I think, us as a system, we're also learning and improving. The example is we have received complaints. We have an open grievance mechanism. Again, on our website front page, anybody can submit a complaint about IRMA. You can see the complaint, you can see our response, you can see the status. And one of the complaints that we received a couple of years ago was on an audit that took place in Chile at the Albemarle site, and the complaints were specifically about a number of things, but between them there was how the auditors had interpreted requirements on indigenous people's rights. And what that did to us as a system, to the auditors, was look at, are our materials up to date, the guidelines, are we training these people in the right way so that they can feel empowered to ask those tough questions to the companies, to the communities, to the workers, et cetera, to then reflect what the reality on the ground is in the audit reports. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yblin, you're very active in representing the rights of rights holders, especially indigenous peoples. What is your main concern with, maybe starting with current mining operations? What are your most pressing concerns you would like to address?
Thank you. Alin Punchai. Ancha agradecer aqui. My name is Yblin. I am representing indigenous peoples. The Securing Indigenous Peoples' Rights in the Green Economy, big name, it says it all about our organization. We advocate for the rights of indigenous peoples. To answer your question, and before I forget, I also want to recognize, please, and acknowledge the work, the great work of our allies and co-workers in the European Union, the European Raw Material Coalition, with whom we work very actively, representing not only the rights of indigenous peoples, but also the rights of local communities and local holders. I mean, here we are talking about the local impacted communities, which are an important part of the formula in the energy transition. To answer your question, I would like to make 2 points. First, why indigenous peoples? We have had already a couple of sessions. We are coming actually from a session which focused on the global north and global south, but I don't know how many of you spotted the mentioning of indigenous peoples, of right holders. Could you please put your hands up if you heard indigenous peoples? Yeah, quite a few. Thank you so much. And was this mentioned a bit in detail? Raise your hands. Not too much. Well, okay, they were mentioned, but okay. Why this matters? To begin with, indigenous peoples, besides being the holders of rich and diverse cultures, which we all treasure, they actually hold on their territories or near their territories 54% of energy transition minerals. And this is only recognized indigenous peoples because in many countries, especially in Asia and in Africa, indigenous peoples are not recognized as such. When we take this group of non-recognized indigenous peoples, our statistics goes to 75 and sometimes 90%. In the US, you have some regions for some metals, it's 90% on the indigenous peoples' territories. So, what actually that means is that energy transition minerals are in our homes. And what is happening, then I come to your question, my second point, what is the major concern? I'm not going to give my perspective here. I'm going to give you the primer of the indigenous peoples themselves. We have come together in Geneva last October in an indigenous peoples summit to define what is just transition from indigenous peoples' perspectives and lived experience on the ground. And in this summit, we had brought indigenous peoples leaders from the 7 sociocultural regions of the world, which means all the world. You had everybody there. And then in this definition, we said actually the energy transition is advancing on our territories without ensuring and respecting the rights of indigenous peoples. It is like, for example, you all are welcome to be for a couple of minutes indigenous peoples. You all have houses, right? And I am a company that is or a government that is interested in mining resources. The resources are in your homes, your home, your home, your home, okay? Then I simply go into your garden. Let's say you have a garden. In Europe, that's not evident, but let's say you have a garden, a beautiful garden full of fruit trees and flowers of your wife or husband, you know. And then this person just comes into your garden and starts digging, looking, and then you go, and then you ask, what are you doing, excuse me? And he says, I'm looking for materials, I'm interested. I think I've heard from the Geological Survey that here it's a good spot to do that. And I said, I'm sorry, okay, no, I don't want that. Actually, this is my home, this is my, could you please talk to me first? And they said, okay, there is material, it's interesting, and it's good for the city and for the world. We are going to save the world, we are going to fight climate change. So we have to get, okay, we found it, we are going to do it. You are lucky, you are going to give your materials to the good of the humanity. And then you say, no, I love my garden. I mean, no, I don't agree with that. It has gone so fast also. I don't understand actually what you want to do. And then what happens is that this person says, I'm sorry, but I already have a permit. Your municipality already agreed to give me your garden so I can extract the resources here. And you say, no, 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 wait, I don't want this. And you try to push this person out. But the municipality comes with the police because the municipality or the government has the force. And then you, as owner of the house, are criminalized, are put into jail, and sometimes, because of the aggression, yeah, you are killed. I've confronted many situations in which a mother, a leader, environmental, cultural defender, a mother, a father, a son. I met Hernan, I remember, I cannot forget. Hernan, he's an environmental defender. He lost his 16-year-old son because he is defending his territory from mining, and he was killed. So this is the huge concern we are thinking. And it's not only mining, because it's territories. We indigenous peoples are very much tied to the territories. And it's not only mining, but it's also energy transition projects, solar, windmills, parks, enormous parks that come and then interrupt the livelihoods of indigenous peoples. So you are an indigenous peoples. What would you ask then in this situation, you think? You would ask, please, I have rights to this house, to this garden, respect my rights. That's what we ask, and that's the concern. And that's right, there are many rights. It's all recognized under the United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples, to which all governments have agreed and endorsed. And the rights are many, but I'm going to just say three. The right to self-determination, that you, as indigenous peoples, have the right to determine what you are going to do with your garden, if you are going to allow extraction or not, or if you allow extraction, in which conditions, and how you're going to negotiate benefit sharing once you say yes. But first is the second right. It's the free, prior, and informed consent. You have the right to say yes, to say yes, maybe, to say no, let me think about it, and to say no. And the FPIC process looks very strange and very abstract. In my experience, normally not many people understand that. And it's simply the F for free, just like you came here to this event, free, nobody, I hope at least, nobody obliged you to come. Prior, you knew of all the details of this event in advance. You were not just passing by and just got in without any information. No, you were informed before the event. And I already mentioned that the third one, informed. You were informed. In English, probably you understand English. Sometimes indigenous peoples on the ground don't speak English, don't speak Spanish, and that's a very important point. You have the right to receive information in your language, in a way that you can understand it. And the last one is the consent part. Unfortunately, not many countries respect the consent part. Consultation is taken as consent. But that's the concerns we are looking. Mining projects, energy transition projects are all coming like a tsunami. You know, Global Witness, they report on environmental defenders killings. In 2023, there were 196 environmental defenders killed. 50% were indigenous peoples. And you see, science tells us that everything is going with a hockey stick. We are increasing in everything exponentially. Also, the violations of indigenous people's rights. So, if you are a government, if you are a company, if you are a scientist developing any technology, have you asked yourself, where is the mine, or where is the mineral I'm working with coming from? Have I respected the rights of indigenous peoples? If we see what is happening in the world, the answer will be no. Thank you.
Maybe just a quick follow-up question. So would you have maybe very tangible advice for industries or governments that would like, for example, to open a mine, how they should, what they should do to involve indigenous peoples in the process to get to ask for consent?
That's such a good question. Thank you for that question, because that gives me the opportunity to give the answer that is in each one of your heads. Actually, it's respecting indigenous people's rights. Respect first and recognize that indigenous peoples are there. We are there. It's not a vacuum. that the project is going to happen. Involve these people meaningfully, not just a tick of the box or, many projects, I know of many projects where companies go and present kind of information. They offer chicken with rice gratis, and they allow indigenous peoples sign, and that's a proof of consent or consultation. That's not meaningful involvement. You have to go with the people, bring the people to the table. I mean, the concept of this event is the round table. Indigenous peoples are rights holders, are not only interested stakeholders. We talk about it. So bring them to the table meaningfully and respect their rights, their right of free, prior, and informed consent. I was happy enough, I had the honor to participate in the UN Secretary General panel development of the recommendations supporting the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. And if you have seen the document, you see that there is a call for all stakeholders to respect the rights of indigenous peoples in the transition, in the energy transition, and that's hugely important. And the motivation for this is actually not to repeat the mistakes of the past. But I'm going to challenge you. These are not mistakes of the past. These mistakes are still happening. Well, I move in many fora. I'm just coming from Indaba, for example. We have talked about the ESGs. If there is time, please, if any one of you wants to ask about ESG, I will be very grateful. But okay, in the different fora, I notice a kind of amnesia. It's like we have forgotten the impacts of mining, that because we call it green mining, it has changed. But actually, there are many companies that are trying to do their best. Many are doing their best, but still the biggest majority of mining and mining processes are still the same. There was a study of Oxfam, it's called Recharging Community Consent. They have studied how the 43 of the companies that are going to supply the transition minerals, if they are ready for ensuring the respect of indigenous peoples, to ensure that the materials you get in your hand have respected indigenous people's rights. What was the result? At the policy level, not on the implementation level. At the policy level, less than 5% of the companies were FPIC ready. Only one really said, we are going to ensure free, prior, and informed consent. All the rest said, yeah, we are going to engage them, we are going to do our best, but if the government says that we shouldn't, we cannot go against the government. That's not possible. And you can actually, if you're a company, the level of the government is a base, a floor, but you can go up to the United Nations Declaration, and in the United Nations Declaration, it's clearly the FPIC process.
Thank you very much. Andrés, you're working on perpetual or non-reversible impacts, that what I understand, environmental impacts especially, also a bit the social, I understand, of mining. So what have you learned, or what have we learned from the past on that?
Thank you for the question. That's exactly the same question that motivated the writing of this report, which you can find in the table outside. And basically, the question, I don't want to be too negative. I think that we have learned things. We have learned that we can, for example, have financial instruments to try and manage these issues decades after mines close. But the question is still what we have to learn. And in that regard, I think the second answer is longer than the first. I think that we still need a lot of learning, especially when we deal with countries that are not prepared in regulatory and policy terms to manage these impacts. And just as a little refresher, perpetual impacts are those impacts that have irresolvable uncertainty, and that their end cannot be determined with enough scientific evidence. So, for example, if you're going to build a large-scale mine and you know that you have problems with acid mine drainage, what is going to happen 20 years after the mining company goes, right? Who is going to pay for that? This framework does not exist in most of the countries, and in the countries where it does exist, it takes not a preventive approach, but a reactive approach. So for example, in the United States, they have the SIRGE Act, and they have the Superfund, and they put money in the Superfund to try and mitigate. That's ex post. Same goes for Germany. Germany has these Stiftungen that are in charge of managing these perpetual impacts, but that's also ex post. That's you know, after the damage has occurred. So the question, and especially relevant now for Europe in the context of the Critical Raw Materials Act, is how is Europe going to react to this? Are we prepared for this? Are we prepared in the European level, like directives like the Waste Directive and other directives are good enough, and also domestic regulations are good enough for this? These are the kind of questions. Maybe a couple of lessons learned. It's better safe than sorry, because it's extremely expensive to try and mitigate these impacts once they are on the ground. And a project that starts wrong ends wrong. So the importance of the environmental impact assessments cannot be understated. Cannot be understated under fast-track processing. It cannot be understated under CRMI, etc. It has to be there upfront, and yeah, basically it's extremely important, and it can be irreversible if you make the mistake.
Thank you. I also would like to address circularity. So how do you see that circular strategies can help to reduce mining activities in the first place?
A lot, and I think that this is a common ground. This is one of the common grounds, so I'm going to be very brief so that we can move on the discussion. This is a common ground between industry, between society, civil sector, etc., and indigenous peoples. Thank you very much, Yblin. You just talked about it. Right holders. We all can agree that it's better to have secondary mining. And I think that mining companies today that are doing virgin extraction really are thinking about moving on, at least partially, to other processes that can recover anthropic ores. Anthropic ores that are in tailings, anthropic ores that are in already mine sites. And we are seeing that these can significantly reduce the footprint of mining. It can reduce the footprint of mining, but also not only in biophysical terms, but also in social conflicts. So if we really, really commit ourselves, for example, to, I don't know, we were talking with some of the people here about recycling magnets, about these long loops and how to make that these long loops are viable economically, financially, that they make sense, that these products have premiums and that they are compensated somehow to use recycled materials. And we have excellent examples like Fairphone. I think that we can reduce the biophysical footprint and the social conflict footprint of the projects.
Thank you. And that leads me directly over to Susanne. RHI Magnesita is mining across the world, magnesite. And do you see actually a potential to reduce mining activities by increasing secondary sourcing?
I would love to give you a simple answer, Alessandra. The answer is yes, but, right? And I address this always with the 30% dilemma, and I'm going to tell you what that is. Now, RHI Magnesita is a backwards integrated manufacturer of industrial ceramics, a niche product, right? Our products are used up in the industrial processes at the global steel plants, aluminum plants, cement plants around the globe. Now we know that 30% of our products is unused in this industrial process, so untouched products. And we know that this 30% of untouched products would mean 30% less mining of virgin raw materials. Now you might think, oh wow, great, so why don't you do it? The problem is that our steel, aluminum, cement customers do not want to buy the recycled products. So I do not fully agree, Andrés, that this is a common ground, because I do believe that we have a major mindset problem here, right? So yes, we as miners can mine less, but then we also need the downstream industries to buy in here, right? And they do not yet.
How does the international, I guess because you mine in so many different countries, how does the collaboration work? Is international collaboration also a hurdle, or maybe lacking collaboration?
Well, recycled products are seen as waste products, and it's extremely complicated to transport waste from one country to another, right? That's one thing. Another thing we see is that landfill is still too cheap. And I certainly do not want to piss off my customers, but if for a steel plant it's still cheaper to landfill than engage in circularity, then there is something wrong here. So there is a lot of need in shaping policies towards making landfill impossible. That is one thing. Another thing is that some regions are more active in circularity because their need is much higher. For instance, we have many plants in India. Now, India has 0 deposits of magnesite. So they cannot produce their own refractories, industrial ceramics. So of course they engage more in recycling because this is what they have to do. So it's a different scenario around the globe. We believe, and we are the only refractory producer who actually does recycling at all. We do believe that we have a certain task to do, and that is bringing this idea and the knowledge of recycling to our peers. Let them know that it is possible, but the ultimate goal must be that our customers are willing to take on circularity and use the recycled products, because it's the same quality, less CO2, right? So we need to have that shift in mindset at the downstream players too.
Yeah, I would be very interested in hearing ideas how that could be improved. Does anyone want to comment on this? And if the audience has questions, you can already raise your hand and then to our panel, and then you have a chance to ask.
I would just like to comment from, let's say, the government or policies perspective. If we're talking about changing the mindsets, I mean, I think in general terms, I think we have outsourced a lot of our problems for far too long. That involves waste treatment, mining, and that's resulted in a, so to speak, geopolitical situation that we are in today, and which resulted also in the recent legislation being adopted. So one, we cannot expect major changes to be made overnight or in a couple of years. So it's also about changing mindsets, changing traditions, allowing for the supply and demand to adapt to the situations or the future that we set out to do. In my case, I've worked for the good part of the last 10 years or so about managing risk from the industry and the government perspective, because ultimately we all operate in a sort of risk environment, so it all depends on what our definitions of risk are. The way we manage those risks are by introducing policies, having financial analysis done if we're talking from an industry's perspective. So for each of us, it's about adapting to the environment that we're in. So we can have the best policies written up. If those won't be implemented, it's just words on paper, essentially. And Cecilia and Yblin also mentioned it's about respect and trust between the different stakeholders. You can, build trust for so long, but you can lose it in an instance, and that goes both for the industry and for the government. Obviously, governments are in their role. I mean, our role is to service the people and the economy as well. How do you manage that? we have different representatives here at the same table, but sometimes in practice that's difficult to achieve. Industries want to have a predictable environment. Governments and people want to have assurance that there will be no damage to the environment, local populations and so forth, and you have countries have different situations. Slovenia is a small country where we have some natural resources, critical resources, but we're also very sparsely populated. We have a lot of nature that's protected. So how do you manage that? So it's looking at different ways you can approach it. Obviously, you can have cake and eat it too, but at the same time, you have to take everything into consideration. Also the energy transition, respecting people's rights, culture, and so forth. And that's not an easy task to do. The case for Slovenia is we have good policies in place. We have real experts at the Ministry of Natural Resources, Economy, Development, Finance, and so forth. One of our limitations, if I can dare to say, is we have limited mining inspectors. We only have about 4 of them for the entire country. And policies, how do you enforce those policies that you set in place? Obviously, you can't put all eggs in one basket, and that's not going to create a predictable and trustworthy environment for the industry, the government, NGOs, local populations, and so forth. So it's about raising awareness of the policy changes that need to be made. It's bringing that up to, I call this policy parity, to align one with other policies, which when you have health crisis, social crisis, it's not an easy thing to do, and looking for solutions. Sounds simple, but in practice it often isn't the case.
Doesn't sound simple.
But that's what we're here to do.
Can I compliment?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I like to complement to the idea of the mindset. And, but before that, I would like to touch risks and why it's important for criticality, because we are here for criticality. And we know that we have to access, we have the supply chain risk and to determine what is critical. And we have the vulnerability or the importance in economic terms of the country or the sector or the region towards this element we are analyzing. In terms of indigenous peoples, and if you see the Ernst & Young statistics of the 10 top risks for the mining sector, you will see that the last 10 years it was social license to operate, ESGs, and this year, 2025, is finance. I'm coming from the Indaba, and I have talked a lot with investors. And investors are worried that indigenous people's rights and local communities, affected local communities' rights are so hardly impacted, and they don't want to give money. I mean, no one wants to be involved with reputational risks. For example, if I ask you, what would you say if I tell you I can give you the best price for a mineral, but it's going to be at the cost of child labor? What are you going to say? Yes? No? Probably not. Oh, I hope not. So the financiers are doing this. That's why it's a high risk, and mining companies and also energy projects need money. So just for the clarity, free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous peoples is equal to social license to operate. There is no social license to operate without FPIC. Then if we go to the mindset, I think we are concentrating here on criticality and climate change and the energy transition. Maybe we should go one step behind. Why are we doing this? What is the end game? What is the goal of this game we are playing? Is it climate change? And with this, I go to a leader of the herding community in Sweden, and he said it very beautifully. He said, Yblin, we cannot destroy our planet and blame it on climate change. Actually, indigenous peoples on the ground are seeing the impacts of climate change, but also are suffering the solutions of climate change. And we think we have to go further. We have to, as Johan Rockström, the rock star of the planetary boundaries, said it very beautifully, we can do everything right in terms of climate change and low carbon transition if we don't take the planetary boundaries, the systemic approach, considering biodiversity, water, land use. Even if we do everything right in terms of climate change, we are going to be in problems, because it's nature that we need to keep. And that's the mindset that we have to hold. And that's the going one step behind and seeing the big picture. Why are we doing what are we doing? And if mining is the solution, or remining, with adaptations, or reducing our demand. You know, there are many scenarios in which demand is going to increase, but these are scenarios, and you have to take assumptions. And these assumptions are built on our current economic models and the consumption levels, especially from Western societies, not everybody. And so common ground from the indigenous people's perspective is going to the core of the topic, going to keep in a systemic way our Mother Earth, our Pachamama, our beautifully planet, so that we can give it to our future generations, but we can also keep it for ourselves.
Yeah, keep talking about scenarios. I think you might have to say something about that. Amrita?
Yeah, I think I'm quite interested in maybe bringing up the topic of recycling again, taking after Andrés and Susanne, and maybe also a question to Susanne in the end, but I'll try to be brief, being mindful of the time that we have left. So at the end of last year, we did a significant amount of analysis on recycling, how it can be scaled up, what are the different challenges, what are the opportunities. Obviously, we all know many of the benefits, but really there's also several challenges. And then with that, we published a report with the outlook for recycled quantities that is possible, but also a set of policy recommendations in order to overcome these challenges. So just to highlight the result of our projections in the most ambitious climate scenario, we see that there is a potential by 2050 for recycled quantities of copper and cobalt to meet almost 40% of the needs for copper and cobalt in that year. And the same for lithium and nickel is about 25% of the demand in that year. So this, of course, is subject to the policies being in place, the infrastructure being in place, and we highlight quite strongly in the report that today, of course, there are several bulk minerals and materials that are being recycled, but energy transition minerals are not seeing that kind of progress. Of course, in the last couple of years, we've had a lot of projects for battery recycling that have been announced in the EU and elsewhere. But we also need to see the same kind of progress for solar panels, for wind turbines, for all other types of technologies as well. So I think there are several challenges, and I would invite anyone that has questions on this to maybe come to me later and also look a little bit into the recycling report. But maybe my question to Susanne would be, you said companies are not willing to take this, and do you have any inputs from there on why that's the case?
Yes. Well, for all of you who have ever been to a steel plant, imagine the steel floating through your plant, right? Horror scenario, worst case scenario. And that happens if the industrial ceramic is broken, right? Now the fear of the procurement guys of the steel plant are afraid that recycled products would enlarge that risk. There is no basis for that. It's just, it's such a horror scenario that they wouldn't even try it out. Now, we were able to convince some, so there is a little bit of progress, but still, the willingness to take risk is very limited. And it's hard to overcome that, right? Would you take that risk and lose your job and have that, right? You know, all that scenarios in their heads. And additionally, a recycled product is not cheaper than the virgin product. On the contrary. So and this is why I said that it's a mindset problem and it's a fear problem also for our niche industry. And it's very hard to overcome, very hard.
I just wanted to give a small comment on cheap. Yes, the cost of remining is not cheap. I have also, as a scientist, participated in a remining project. But it's not cheap in economic terms. But sustainability is more than economy, right? So in terms of social, people that are not killed, water that it's not polluted, biodiversity that it's kept. So again, our concepts of cheap or not cheap, maybe expensive is cheap. Thank you.
Thank you. But yes, but to kind of translate this in economic terms, so who should make this, who should be responsible for making sure that kind of the price reflects whatever damage is done? Do you have any suggestions?
When I told the story of IRMA at the beginning in my intervention, I didn't mention that there's a sixth interest group that came on afterwards onto our board and into the broader system, and that's the finance sector. The finance sector asks for better practices, not because basically in the longer term, and you can ask steward investors, Mirova, Natixis, these are just like some investment firms that really believe in this, that in the longer term, the return on investment in better operations, it's just better. It's a safer bet. And mining, it's not a straightforward industry. It's an industry that has a very big backpack, let's call it, right? A legacy. And it's not an easy image to clean up. So that's why investors were brought in. And part of their ask for these companies is implement the highest standards. And I talk to like mining companies day in and day out that ask, what about the premium? And it's, yes, sure, perhaps there should be a premium. But the reality is, what are you doing to secure in the longer term your investment? I think I'm going to refer to another IEA report that came out at the end of 2023, where the IEA looked at security of supply risks linked to ESG. And they were like 6 or 7. Some of them were community relations. If you don't have successful community relations, you don't have a project, therefore you don't have a profit. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. I'd also like to,
this is, before I say it, I want to say that this is coming from a geologist, so take it with a grain of salt, right? But I think most of the fears, for example, in European mining, is that Chinese mining can produce their products much cheaper, and they can sell it here, and they can produce it without, all the environmental, social standards, right? This is also, seen inside the sector. Companies that do less recycling, for example, might be better positioned than companies that do more recycling, because the production process of companies that do recycling are more expensive in economic terms. And the question is how to bring this value of nature into the market, right? Into market prices, which I know it's a huge discussion, and I don't want to say that everything can be commodified. But, for example, imagining market instruments and regulatory and policy instruments that charge the companies that have less recycling in proportion, and providing advantages for companies that have more recycling in proportion. So make this a loop between the companies, benefit the ones that do more, and charge the ones that do less. That way we could have a leveled playing field. That could be something that can be done without, involving any other stakeholders. Just money from companies that don't do so great to money for companies that do better.
It's like a trading system then.
I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be creative.
I think the question you are asking is who should pay the price? Yes? And I am going to ask a different question. Who is paying the price now? And then when we ask this question, we are going to go to the local communities. We are going to go to the children in Congo that are paying the price with their future to communities in Bolivia, in Chile, in Argentina, in Indonesia, everywhere. Because our economic model is based basically on accepting that social and environmental costs are externalized, and we can do that. If we internalize these costs is another story. And I want to make a comment on mining. Mining has a backpack, as Cecilia said. And I have seen many efforts in mining, and we also work with companies. So we try to educate them, and many respond very well, and many are interested in truly ensuring the rights of indigenous peoples. But if you see in general talking about mining, the narrative, I follow the European Union discussion, you have sustainable mining. But then that's challenged. Sustainable mining does not really exist, even if we take the technological approach. Then you go to green mining, because it's going to be for the green technology. But then the European Environmental Bureau brings this report that says green mining is actually a myth. And then you found last year in the OECD forum the development mining, trying to link mining to the SDGs. But then I ask, please stop trying to greenwash mining or to put labels that make it more acceptable, and actually go to the core of ensuring the rights of the indigenous peoples, ensuring environmental safeguards. And that's the way you are going to build trust with the communities. You are going to reduce risks. Because then if we just keep on putting labels and not internalizing the costs, where are we going to end up with happy hour mining or something like that? No, we really have to go to the core and say, okay, we want mining where it's possible under the terms of the local affected communities, being indigenous peoples or being non-indigenous peoples. And when these communities do not want to risk 30 years of mining and some jobs and some income in change of 500 years of polluted water and livelihoods, which is going to mean the loss of their culture, this is an existential threat for indigenous peoples, and everywhere. In Sweden, the Sami community. In Bolivia, in Peru, everywhere. So, thank you.
So I understand that we all agree that the circular economy should be incentivized. We maybe are not really sure how to do that, although there are ideas about it. I would like to close again with the topic of the mining, and would ask if anybody, so you can say that's too complicated, but if you know of any example, and if you're not, you can make up an example where there's actually mining operation that successfully manages, the interests of, where the interests somehow match, or you can find a good dialogue between industry, government, and local rights holders, and environmental considerations. So do you know of one of this, or you could also say what would be, in my fantasy, the ideal project? Maybe Marko, you start?
Just in brief, most recent context, I'm not a pessimist by nature. I'm more of a critical realist optimist. But depends on who you ask, might view it differently. But anyhow, I think now with the current energy situation in Europe and in Slovenia, we have one remaining coal mine in the country, which employs thousands of people in parallel. That's important to the culture, the country as a whole. And over the last couple of months, we had really good relationships in terms of preparing the legislation for the closure of the mine, in light with the just transition and whatnot. So I think that's been a good example, which has obviously much work to be done. But we've tried to take lessons from the past into account, taking into account the local situation, the workers, the environment, the economy, the industry, and so forth. And I think it should prove to be a success. I'll remain optimistic.
Thank you.
I'm asked this question a lot, like, can you tell me a good project? And the answer is always it's complicated, or there are some good nuggets of maybe a water stewardship practice or biodiversity, etc. I think what we see personally is that it's really hard for mining companies to put their dirty laundry out there. And that's what entering the IRMA system requires them to do. because it's a really detailed assessment that they're required to undergo by external auditors that interview or that look at not just what happens in the enclosed space of a mine site, but also outside the mine, with communities, with workers, and so on. And, you know, my invitation is we need to create, you know, I think like perfect is the enemy of the good often, where what we need, and again, what we do is not a tick box exercise, but it's that progressive improvement. So we need to incentivize companies to progressively improve, but in order to do that, they need to be transparent about their practices, about what they're doing, so invite them to put their dirty laundry out there in the first place.
I am with Cecilia in this. I think it's not ticking boxes, and there is no single example of perfect mining, because we are talking about an activity that, by its own nature, it's depleting non-renewable resources, at least non-renewable at a human scale. So, of course, there will be someone who will be unhappy every time. Sometimes it's absolutely justified. Sometimes we have mines that have violated human rights, and with those, there is absolutely no discussion possible. You cannot do that. You cannot engage in human rights violations and then say, well, but we didn't pollute the water. Yeah, but it doesn't make it, you know, a sum-zero game. But in other cases, there is good performance in the biophysical, maybe some needs in the social, especially in countries of the Global South. I've seen that most of the environmental conflicts start when the mining company gets to the site and they don't ask what they're doing. So they do geochemical assessments, they do campaigns, and people see these weird guys with, you know, vests, reflective vests, taking water samples, and they don't understand what they're doing, and they're in their land. And it would be so easy for these companies to just go there first, explain to people what they're going to do, just an idea, just we are offering you this opportunity, do you want to take it? And communicate the risks, because this is also part of this report. You have to be honest about the risks. If you don't know, if something may happen, you have to put it on the table. Take the dirty laundry out, as Cecilia said. Take it out, say it, and be proactive in communication. I think there is no single good example, but I think the people in the mining sector are not supervillains that are trying to do everything wrong and kill everybody here. They are people who see an opportunity of market, and they are people who are trying to resolve societal needs. And I think that there is always a mixed frame there.
Now it's a hard task, right? Being the only industry representative here.
Not the supervillain.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'd say that our mines are perfect mines, probably. Nothing is perfect, but it's also easy from a magnesite mining perspective, because there are no byproducts, no water in the whole process. So the mining is, for us, the mining is the easy part, the processing is the harder part, and the pollution part, right? I'd like to finish with one sentence, because I don't want you to get me wrong. I really believe we need more mines in Europe. I really believe that. But before we open new mines, we should try to recycle more. And this is my message from an industry perspective.
Hello? Yeah. I think we need strong frameworks. I think countries, companies, researchers have to say what they do and do what they say. And they have to comply with the United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples and accept that indigenous peoples are important for keeping this planet alive, and recognize that most of the biodiversity is on indigenous peoples, left is on indigenous peoples. Most of carbon capture, biogenic carbon capture, are on indigenous peoples. So accept their role and respect their rights. That's a quick fix, complex because nobody does yet, but we hope it happens. FPIC, and here we have our own protocols. So free, prior, and informed consent. We are ready. We are not victims. We are partners ready to cooperate with you. Are you a researcher? Are you a company? Are you a government? Come to us, not over us. And I want to share one quote. It's if we are not at the table, at this round table, normally what history shows is that we are on the menu. So don't let it happen. Indigenous peoples matter.
Thank you. Did you bring this report for, can people pick it up?
Yes, no, I'm going to share a QR code.
Okay, QR code, we can hang it up. Okay, I give you the last word,
I
Amrita.
will take just 1 minute. All excellent points made today, and just from the perspective of an energy organization compared to mining or industry. I think environmental and social issues are extremely important, as we've been discussing all this time. But we need to be wary of putting that blame on the energy transition, because mining has impacts also for all other uses, and of course very similar or worse impacts for coal mining and drilling for natural gas. And energy transition minerals have the advantage of being able to be recycled, which coal, natural gas, oil don't. So, and also that the life cycle emissions of an EV are still lower than that of an ICE. And obviously, we all know the benefits of solar and wind versus gas-fired power plant. So while addressing all the issues of mining, we shouldn't make it just about the energy transition, rather broadly more about mining. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Please join me in giving a hand to this excellent panel. So all of our panelists will be here now and also in the next days. So please feel free. They're happy if there are questions and discussions. We will now have the apéro dinner. Yeah, we're already a bit late, so lots of space for discussion. And at 7:30, a film will be brought to us by the CIRAN project here in this hall, also with a discussion following it. So I'm happy to see you all now at the apéro dinner.